So we're going to talk about Puglia. Again, on the map, I've marked Bari and Foggia in Puglia. And what you can see is down there on sort of the heel of the boot of Italy. I've marked Popiano, where I live, and I marked a town in the south on the southern coast of Turkey, which is called Mira. And we're going to talk about that as well. That was part of the Roman Empire, and that is where St. Nicholas was born. And so we'll talk about Mira as well. So just quickly then, here is Popiano where I live, full-time spring with the Rose Lady Banksia blooming. And here's where we're going to go in Puglia. So I've kind of zoomed in and we're going to sort of hop around the area of the Val d'Itria, the Murgia, and Daunia, and come back to Bari here. And we're going to just sort of, we're kind of making the grand tour of these areas of Puglia. And I'm going to kind of touch on sacred spaces in these different places of Puglia. So quick background, Puglia basically historically followed the vicissitudes of southern Italy with some differences. So the native tribes to this area came from the Balkans, which makes it a little bit different already. And Lorenzo, qualcuno sta facendo l'erba fuori? Lo senti te o no? Non ti sento.
Lo sento un po', lo sento, ma leggero.
Se devo chiudere la porta, dimmi, okay?
Sarebbe meglio, però.
My neighbor's cutting the grass. Hang on a second. I'm gonna try to get rid of some noise. Okay, that might be better.
Meglio.
Okay, good. Meglio. All right, good. So the native tribes came in from the Balkans. Then the Greeks in the 8th century BC, Greeks from Sparta started settling as they were colonizing throughout the Mediterranean basin. And then after that, the Byzantine Empire came in and ruled literally for almost 500 years with a brief interlude of an Arab dominion when Bari was actually an emirate. They went back though to the Byzantine Empire. The Normans came in from 1059 until 1200. The Swabian Empire came through here. So Frederick the Second was the Holy Roman Emperor. We're going to talk a lot about him. After him, he ruled through about 1250. The Angevin French were here. The Aragonese, Spanish, Habsburgs, Bourbons. There was a Napoleonic interlude in the early 1800s. And then, of course, Puglia joined the Kingdom of Italy in 1861. So that basically follows the history of southern Italy, with the exception of 500 years under the Eastern Byzantine Empire, which makes things a little different. So it's not quite the same as you find in Campania or Sicily. And this idea that the native tribes descended from the Balkans, which of course, there's gypsies over there, and the Pugliese are a little bit different. And I was talking to a friend of mine, she goes, all those artist types from Puglia, they're all kind of nomadic. And she kind of thinks it's because they descended from these Balkan gypsies. It could be. Another thing, though, to keep in mind about Puglia, it's the easternmost point of Italy. This was Bari and other ports were hugely important for trade with the Levant, and they were the jumping off point for crusades. So kind of keep in mind, this is really a point of kind of a mixing point for the East and West. So keep that in mind because it kind of colors things and makes it different from other points in southern Italy. So I'm going to give y'all just a couple of kind of slides giving you kind of setting the scene. Then we'll start in and look at a couple of different individual villages and different sacred spaces. So this is Polignano al Mare, just south of Bari. The products that were being traded from Puglia around the Mediterranean, specifically with Africa and the Levant, they were sending out wheat, timber, linen, wine, fruits, nuts, and a lot of olive oil. And they were trading it for spices, gold, honey, beeswax from Africa, jewels, silks, art objects from the Levant. And there was this peaceful kind of coexistence of powers. Bari itself had trading partners in Antioch, and they actually had a merchant colony set up in Antioch. The Venetians were hugely basically dominant in the entire Adriatic and then down that coastline. So this is that eastern coastline of Italy. So the Republic of Venice was basically the dominant power in Italy, and they had trading bases set up all throughout Puglia as well. Amalfi was important. They came from obviously the other coast. And these guys all had their best interest at heart, and they were trying to preserve the peace. So they were making agreements with one another in order to not upset the balance of power. So Venice even came to the aid of Bari at one point. They liberated Bari from the Arabs and gave them back to the Byzantines. Venice could have easily taken Bari, but they wanted to preserve their trade agreements all throughout the Byzantine Empire. So they were all kind of working in these alliances, trying to maintain the balance of power. And that lasted basically until the Crusades started in the late 11th century, at which point nobody was really happy. So the balance of power kind of got out of whack at that point. Puglia was the biggest exporter of olive oil during the Roman Empire, and they're still a huge, huge exporter today. This is an olive grove. The trees are enormous. Agriculture and agricultural products are still a big part of the economy. Tourism is big. They also have a good slice of industry. The tech sector is big in Puglia as well. Their economy is actually quite strong. It's the strongest in southern Italy. All right, this is Monopoli, which is this adorable little town south of Bari, just south of Bari. And there's no sort of major monument to see here, but it's kind of a fun place to stay. It's kind of a good place to stay as a base to explore that area. And you can see they have this tiny little port, and there's two ways to get into the port. One is to walk around the castle there, which you see a close-up of on the right, and in this way. Or you can kind of go in this under this little archway, which you can see these women are doing. It's kind of a protected entrance or exit, and they actually could close it with the gates so that keep out enemies. Here's what the little port looks like. It's quite charming. You can see there's sort of Venetian architecture here in the port. And then the streets are, it's just kind of a fun little town to walk around. It's a real mix of just folks going about their daily life. In the center there, you see Nino il calzolaio. He's the shoemaker. And then on the right, it's just this cute, casual little spot for fried fish, basically. And they have this really interesting procession of Madonna niches that is just so charming. The entire town is covered with these Madonna niches with all variety of fake flowers. I particularly like these. They have the little roses and then the little lace bits, and they do them up. And this guy's protected from the rain. But this just cracks me up. There's so many, the window fixtures out of complete, metal, protected from the rain with the key. A little bit further down the coast is Ostuni, and it is known as Lachita Bianca because it's mostly whitewashed, and you can see that they're whitewashed up on the hill above the coast, and you can see their cathedral right on the top of the hill there. You can see the outline of the facade of the cathedral and the bell tower. To get up there, it's all these nice little windy streets, and the spaces are super tight. You kind of come out of this arch and you end up in the small piazza here in front of this super interesting late Romanesque cathedral.
Scusa,
Sì.
puoi ripetermi i nomi che li scrivo nella chat box delle città che hai visitato? Polignano?
Monopoli.
Polignano a mare, Monopoli?
E questo è Ostuni.
Ostuni.
Sì.
Grazie.
Okay, there you go, grazie a te. So here is this really unique facade on a late Romanesque cathedral here on top of the hill in Ostuni. This is dated 1450. Interestingly, it's still got the big sort of Gothic rose window up there in the center. I've never seen another church like this. I think it's unique with this kind of arch on either side of the kind of pointy central section. They're really decorating exteriorly with various kinds of stonework, and you'll see that as we go through here. This is just, I think, very lovely. It's almost like these little blind arches are almost like little kind of lace work, and then you can see the intricate carving involved to do that rose window. The interior has been renovated many, many, many times over these centuries, and you can see it's got some more recent decoration. Also, near Ostuni in the countryside, is this dolmen. It's called the Dolmen of Montalbano. It's near the little town of Montalbano. All these things are marked. So when you're traveling around Sicily, literally you just sort of see a little brown sign that says the Dolmen of Montalbano that way, and just, detour and kind of, hike through somebody's olive grove in order to get here. There are these kind of mysterious structures. I mean, they were built in the Bronze Age. They're not quite sure how they were done. I mean, these stones are enormous. You can actually stand up inside of there. So there's this real kind of energy. In Italian, they would say atavico. So I don't know, that word exists in English, but I've never heard it used. So I think it's kind of an ancestral energy when you come to this place. And there's several of these out and about in various olive groves here. So they're not, this is Bronze Age. They're not super sure what was going on here, but these prehistoric peoples built these sort of almost like mini temples, almost, as most likely to as a space of worship, and perhaps to the cult of the sun, which is sort of common when you think about places like Stonehenge or Newgrange in Ireland. So they probably were playing with the solstice. And a similar kind of ancestral energy is kind of given off by these structures that are called the trulli, which I think y'all probably all either seen in person or seen pictures of. These things are they're all over the Val d'Itria, that area south of Bari. And they're used as structures for people who are working out in the countryside. If they need to spend the night overnight, they're also used as houses. And the houses themselves have residential space. They're also used for grain storage, animal shelter, everything, all the different activities in the household kind of take place in these various cones of the trulli. They're separated out, but they're all kind of conglomerated together. I'll show you how they're built in a second. And they're decorated with these kind of curious symbols. Some of them are Christian, some of them are actually Jewish, some are astrological even. The idea of using these symbols, though, kind of harkens back to this kind of pagan ritual of really kind of entrusting your destiny to this, kind of a mysterious force. And this comes from a farming community, so they're basically trying to ensure health, good harvest, and keeping away evil spirits. And also, especially in the south of Italy, they're always very interested in keeping away the evil eye, for example, so that your neighbor doesn't, envy your products or whatever, and end up, causing your harvest to go awry. Even the pinnacles of the buildings, the ones you see on the right are all circles, but they vary greatly actually, and they're not super sure what's going on here. But the various forms again come back to this idea of the cult of the sun, which was worshipped by even primitive agricultural people. So clearly that had such a big impact on their harvest. So that may be what the symbols are. This is how the trulli are built. So the single cone is literally, it's a circular plan on top of a cistern. The cistern collects rainwater from the roof. There is no mortar in these buildings. That's another reason why they're just so amazing. They're all done dry stone. So the weight-bearing walls you can see here are double with kind of rubble or stones here in that interior space for some thermal isolation. And then the roof is literally concentric circles going all the way up to form a cupola, which is then closed with this little keystone pinnacle. They're amazing. Again, no mortar. I'm always shocked by that. And they're modular. So you can build one if you just need a little shelter out in the countryside to keep your tools, or if it's your house, you can actually build two, or if you get a new cow, you can build a third one, and they all kind of come together and form these little conglomerations. So on the left, you can see a complex of coni di trullo at Loco Rotondo, which is basically a big farmhouse. And then on the right, you can see an entire city, which they're done like row houses in this case. And that's Alberto Bello, which I think a lot of y'all have heard of. It's kind of one of the more famous spots for the trulli structures. Another good thing about Alberto Bello is that Pietro Intini makes olive oil here. He makes excellent Pugliese olive oil. I'm going to use that tonight in cooking. Here's an interior view up into the cupola, and then some of the alcoves that are used for storage or animal. This actually looks like a stall for animal feed. And then of course today they've renovated the trulli, so you can actually go rent one and have your summer holiday in Puglia. So when they said it's free, come to Puglia. So heading up north of Bari, this is at a little town called Roubo Di Pujam. And this is another one of these just quite spectacular Romanesque cathedrals. This is super early. This is from the 1100s. And again, you can see what they're really working in stone for the decoration. The design of the building is literally soaring towards the heavens. It really has that absolute just kind of soaring feeling to it. And again, the kind of three doors like we saw in Ostuni as well. Here, very elaborated with these great griffins. There's really nothing to do in Roubo. You're in the middle of nowhere. So the only thing to do here is to see this excellent cathedral. You can see on the left the interior, and there's a great restaurant here. It's called Upepide. Hopefully they're going to open back up, excuse me, after the pandemic. My fingers are crossed. That's always a good stop when you're down there. And then right by Roubo are another series of dolmen. This is the one called Alberosa. This is a little bit shorter. It comes up to about here. And then there's this great one. You can actually stand up in here. This is called Kiaka. This is near Bisceglie. Again, they believe this one even has an entry path, which is still demarcated by those stones that are standing. Again, it's sort of similar to Stonehenge or Newgrange, and most likely worked with solstices. This is how one idea of how they might have erected these stones. They think it would have taken at least 100 people to get that cover in place. It's so heavy. Just a little bit north into the area which is called the Murgia, which is kind of this high plain, is the Castel del Monte. It really is in the middle of nowhere. It really dominates the entire surroundings. And this was built in about 1230 for Federico II, Frederick II, who's that Swabian Holy Roman Emperor. He followed the Normans. He was an interesting, say.
Sono 20 minuti.
Excuse me, 1 second, checking the oven. So Federico.
I write in the box the name that Elaine said. So also the name of the castle. Vai, prego.
Ok, Lorenzo, un po' di bruciacchiatura qua, quindi speriamo che quell'altro magari si cuoce in tempo.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I'll show you for it now. So Federico II was called Stupor Mundi. He was an interesting person. He ruled in mostly peace. He had grown up in Sicily, in Palermo, where there was this great, the Norman preceded him. There was this, again, a mix of Latin and Greek culture. There was a great Arab component there as well. So he kind of had all that in mind. He was very much kind of focused on the arts and culture. And this building shows kind of a lot of his interests, which include astronomy, astrology, geometry, math, elements of the Muslim world as well. So you can see that it's an octagonal plan. Each angle has a tower, and each tower is octagonal. And then on the interior, there are 2 levels. Each level has 8 rooms. So they're playing on this number 8. They haven't exactly figured out everything that's going on here. It is full of symbolism, and they are really working with how the sun hits and comes into that courtyard. And they've even linked it to the golden ratio, and it seems to work with the astrological symbols as well, and the solstices. So again, they haven't actually managed to figure it out, but there seems to be a lot going on. The rooms, all the decoration has been removed to museums. It was richly decorated. It doesn't seem to have served defensive purposes. We're not really sure what was going on out here. I mean, again, it just seems sort of esoteric. They think it might have been a place to practice the sport of falconry, which was dear to Federico. And they've also linked it up, and I've never really studied this very much, but I was fascinated by it. They've linked it up to the Fibonacci numbers, and some of y'all may be familiar with that. I started talking to friends about it, and half my friends were like, yeah, sure, the Fibonacci numbers. And the other ones were like, what? And I had never heard of this before. So there's Federico II there on the right with his falcon. And his buddy Fibonacci is this mathematician. You can see him there in the inset. He was a professor at the university in Naples, which I think was the first or one of the first universities founded in Italy, and it was founded by Federico II. And what Fibonacci did, he studied geometry, but the numbers are a sequence of numbers that exists in nature, and they describe among other things, this swirl that you see in an artichoke, you see it in a fern, you see it in a sunflower, you see it on Cavolo Romanesco, you see it in a seashell. And the numbers themselves, you can kind of see how they work here. And again, this is Fibonacci didn't invent this. He just found it in nature and then figured out how to classify it and categorize it. But 1 + 1 is 2, 2 and 3 is 5, 8 and 5 is 13, and so on for infinity. And amazingly, you can actually find that, in an artichoke. It's pretty amazing. So somehow all this is linked in here too with Castel del Monte, and you see the plan there, and they're working with the number 8. And again, they're not really sure why they chose 8, but it may be a sign of the infinity symbol. So again, there's a lot going on. It hasn't totally been uncovered, but it's a really interesting spot. And the way that it just sort of dominates the landscape here makes it a really, really interesting visit. And just the way the light plays in there and the way all these angles come together, because it's full of octagons and squares and hexagons. And it's got this very, very, very interesting energy. And then just north of there, you end up in the Daunia. And this is a really agricultural area. My ancestors on my paternal side come from here, that little town you see at the top called Roseto Val Fortore. The capital of this region is Foggia, and the seaside area is that little, what you see there on the bottom left. About 15 minutes from where my ancestors are from is kind of a bigger town called Troia. And here you see their Romanesque cathedral. This was done in the early 1100s. We're kind of marching backwards with these cathedrals. This one is just unique for its rose window. I've never seen carving like that in a rose window, although I have seen carving like that. And these are called transenne, these sort of pieces of stone that look like lattice work, kind of tracery. And Moorish craftsmen did that in Sicily, and those guys were working in Puglia as well. So I kind of wonder if that's who was doing this. They were playing around with the number 11 here, 11 being the number of apostles once you subtracted Judas from the equation. And there are, in fact, I think 11 spokes and 11 transenne. Each one is different. The patterns there, each motif is different, not only in each transenne, but also in the little topper bits, which are kind of lobed with the 3 lobes. Really, again, just sort of a different kind of take on a church facade. You don't run into this every day. On the back, interesting, with 8 columns, war spoils from the Normans. And then the door of the cathedral, and this dates to 1119. It was done by Odersio di Benevento. Y'all have heard me say before that the cast bronze doors were a thing. They were a thing on these cathedrals. They were incredibly difficult to do, and not many craftsmen could pull this off. This is Odersio's masterpiece. And you can see that what he's done is combining low relief and high relief. And the knockers are just fabulous with these high relief dragons with their curly tails. Each one's different. And then the lions down below. All right, let's go into Bari itself. The city, what you're looking at, actually, the city of Bari is enormous. I think it may be the biggest city in southern Italy. It may even be the 3rd largest city in Italy. Lorenzo can tell us if that's the case. It's huge. And I've cut off most of the kind of suburb area, the outskirts out here, which is a really gritty city. This part that you can see here, that's just kind of nicely laid out in an orderly fashion. This was done in the early 1800s by Napoleon's brother-in-law, Murat. Very lovely, lovely kind of very livable city. And then the old town of Bari is what you see here on the peninsula. And you can see it's just this warren of little tiny streets. This dates from the Byzantine period. And it was heavily, heavily defended by a whole series of walls, most of which still stands. And obviously it's along the water. And then there were literally 2 entrances, one here and one here from land. And apparently, when you're there, they'll tell you that the reason that they designed the city, they didn't use the Roman or Greek plan of cross streets. They have all these windy little, it's more like a Casbah Medina or something. The idea was if an enemy was able to get in, he wouldn't know where he'd get lost immediately. He wouldn't be able to figure out where he was. It's just, that's how much of a maze it is in there. So we're going to go down into Bari Vecchia here. This was laid out, remember, in the Byzantine period. And this is the great Basilica to San Nicola, Saint Nicholas. And it was built on the site of the residence of the Catepano. So he's the head guy in the Byzantine Empire. And this was his house, the location of his house. When the Normans took over, they decided we're not going to use Bari as our capital anymore. This was literally the capital of basically the capital of the Italian section of the Byzantine Empire. So at one point, it was literally all of southern Italy was ruled from this spot. So as soon as the Normans came in, they decided they were taking the court to Palermo, and Bari sort of settled into life as more of a almost kind of political backwater. But the Normans gave them this site to use, they gave it to the church. Right around the same time, the relics of Saint Nicholas were brought into Bari. 1087, Saint Nicholas died over there in Greece, and these guys, there were 62 Barese sailors decided they needed the bones of Saint Nicholas, and they say they were rescuing them from the Islamic Turks who had just taken over. The Eastern Orthodox Church, I think, saw it as a theft, and it was basically a power play. It's like, okay, we've got the bones of Saint Nicholas, like that kind of, they lost the seat of power because the Normans had moved it over to Palermo, but they got the bones of Saint Nicholas. It was kind of a big deal. So 1087, I think it was. Hang on a second, I can confirm that. 1087, the relics of St. Nicholas are brought into Bari, and they decide to design this church to house the relics of St. Nicholas. He was from this town called Mira in what had been the Roman Empire. He died in the mid 4th century AD. We don't know much about him at all. We think he was a historical figure. He was persecuted by Diocletian, apparently, and he was at the Council of Nicaea. So the Nicene Creed, he signed off on that. He was hugely popular. He's still hugely popular. And he has become the patron saint of, and I'm going to read you the list because it's a good list. He's the patron saint of sailors, merchants, archers, repentant thieves, prostitutes, children, brewers, pawnbrokers, and unmarried people. Is that not hilarious? Like, glad they're looking out for me, right? I mean, I got Saint Nick. So here is, to pick this building apart really quickly, these are towers, which are these kind of short, almost Norman type towers on the side. And so if you take that out of the equation, you look at the facade, it's kind of soaring like we saw in Roubo. So it's built around the same time. For whatever reason, they chose not to do the big, huge rose window. They decided to do these little bifora, and then they really articulated the front door. And here you can see the front door. They have these oxen that are holding up the little columns and all of this elaborate carving. And there's one other kind of interesting thing here, right? The guy who's on the phone, right above his head, you can see there's a little line right here. This is this is a standard of measurement. So the measurement that was used in the medieval period was the braccio, and the braccio is just under 23 inches, but it's basically the measurement that's from the tip of your elbow to the tip of your middle finger. In order to standardize that, they drew it literally on the facade of the church. So anybody who's selling cloth or anything else that's sold by length, this is where you can come to say, okay, this is the standard length that we're using. So make sure everybody's using the same unit of measurement. Here's the interior of the church. Again, it's similar to those others, which is fairly austere and somber. It's marked with these columns all the way down. These are, again, war booty ancient columns that were brought in from sort of all over the Mediterranean. That upper register is a matroneum. It's a gallery for women to participate in Mass without actually mingling. In the nave down below, this became common after it was built here. And then when you move down towards the apse, this is kind of where all the action is. There is the statue of Saint Nick, San Nicola. It's brought out just for his feast day on the 6th of December, or around that period. I was there in November and he was already out with flowers and whatnot. And you can see the ciborium, which is kind of this interesting little cover over the altar. We've seen those before in Rome and elsewhere. And then we'll take a look at the presbytery. So behind the altar, they have these wonderful cosmatesque inlaid marble floors. And again, Arab craftsmen were at work here, and you can see these kind of look like Kufi symbols. It's sort of, they believe it's sort of, they think it's pseudo-Arabic. It may not say anything. At some point, somebody thought it said Allah is great, but it's what I've read recently is that it just is sort of pseudo-Arabic symbols. But anyway, it's used sort of in this decorative way behind here. And then here is this, it's called the Cathedral of Elia. Elia is the guy who had the original basilica built, and he had it consecrated by Pope Urban II. And he had Pope Urban II come in. They decided to sort of have a meeting of all the bishops of southern Italy while he was there. And this is the chair he sat in. And what's remarkable about this is a masterpiece of medieval sculpture, which really you can kind of trace it all the way up to the Renaissance in Florence, particularly for the volumetric and expressive figures that are shown here, all of which are being eaten by lions, except for this guy in the center. It's kind of peculiar, and stylistically, it really can kind of literally bring us towards the Renaissance in Florence, thanks to a sculptor who was from Florence, worked in Pisa, called Nicola Pisano. We'll talk about him some other time. Other bits and pieces in the church are kind of interesting. In the center there, you see the crown of Roger. Roger the First was Guiscard. He was the Norman king. He took over all of southern Italy. And as you recall, in Palermo, Roger had himself depicted being crowned by Christ. Well, in Bari, he decided he'd be crowned by Saint Nick. That's how important San Nicola was to these people, because Roger had no qualms about having himself be crowned by Christ, but it was obviously more effective. This is an enamel piece, and clearly there is some loss as well as some oxidation of the color. So it's a little bit hard to make out. But what is happening is that San Nicola is literally placing that crown on the head of Roger, just to make sure everybody knew who was in charge and gave him some authority. If San Nicola put the crown on its head, then you better pay attention. And then down in the crypt, there is an altar where the bones of the saint are located. And the bones of the saint, like I said, it was a power play to the point that the rulers of Bari actually started giving out bits and pieces as political favors. So there's like the finger San Nicola, the Count of Flanders, and he of course set up a chapel up there because he had this, a relic, the finger of saint. In that way, that even helped spread the popularity of San Nicola to the point that literally in Holland, they were literally worshiping San Nicola. They called him Sinterklaas. And they're the guys who brought him over into New York when they came and settled New York. And now we have Santa Claus. It literally all links back up to San Nicola here in Bari. Also in the crypt is an altar for Eastern Orthodox worship. And you can see the icon of San Nicola there on the right with his Orthodox garb on. And then the two bottles in the center are very peculiar in that the tomb of San Nicola releases a liquid that they call myrrh or manna. And apparently it smells like rose water, and apparently it's miraculous. And these are just examples of the kind of bottles that it's collected in. And it's they've never examined this liquid. We're not really sure exactly what's going on there. The crypt is below sea level though, so it could just be a little humidity. We're not sure. But the bottles, especially these kind of heart-shaped bottles, are very kind of interesting and examples of these sort of tiny little, holy water vials. So back out in Bari Vecchia, again, I mentioned the town has walls around. You can actually walk around the walls, kind of like you do at Lucca or something, only here you have a view of the ocean. It's kind of nice. And then down in the city, this is another upper view. Here's the Basilica of San Nicola. This is another one of those Swabian castles. You can actually get into Bari Vecchia this way by going under this arch. And that arch is called Via Arcobasso, the low arch. And the sign says, here we sell orecchiette and orecchioni, fresh made. And you walk in and all of a sudden you're in these windy little lanes, and these little ladies are literally sitting on the street making orecchiette and selling them out of their garage. And the ladies in Bari the ladies who live in the new section of Bari, when they need some orecchiette, this is where they come to buy their orecchiette. It's not a tourist thing at all. This is actually where if anybody's making orecchiette for lunch, this is where you come to buy them. Here are just some sort of scenes of Bari Vecchia, which is quite charming. It's kind of like being in a movie. And then the seaside is very nice. This is this great big piazza that's decorated for San Nicola. These are luminariae, which when they're lit up, they look like this. And then you can see also photos here of street foods available in Bari, which are amazing. Panzerotti, and then on the bottom, Maria, you see there in her garage, she kind of opens up during the feast of San Nicola, and she's selling popizze, which are little fried bits of dough, basically. And then there is the great, absolutely luscious focaccia Barese, which is what we're about to make. It looks like a pizza, but it's not. It kind of melts in your mouth. It's really an amazing kind of a dough. So we're going to make focaccia Barese. Notice these are the kind of tomatoes they use. They actually can hang them up and use them. So when tomatoes aren't fresh, they actually have these been hanging there since summer. And then we're going to make cicatelli, which are a pasta similar to orecchiette or cavatelli that they make up near Foggia. So I'll tell you all about that when we're making them. And the recipe that we're using for the focaccia Barese is the recipe from Panificio Fiore, which is just outside the precinct of the Basilica of San Nicola. So I'm going to get that going. Let's see. All right, so we're going to get the dough going. Hang on, I'm heating up my water. There was an article in the paper that kind of, the other day, that kind of explains the process here. First of all, I'm going to use a mix of 2 flours, and I'll of course send all of this to y'all tomorrow. And I'm using flours that are from, you can see the logo here, Molini del Ponte in Castelvetrano, and you can get this online through Gustiamo, and I'll send you the link for that. So I'm using these great Sicilian heritage wheat varieties. I'm using regular flour, which is sort of all-purpose flour like you are familiar with, and then I'm also using some hard wheat flour, which is very common to these southern areas. And I'm using, this is kind of one of the keys to this recipe. I have a potato here. I've been mashing up a potato. I'm going to finish mashing it. So this is one of the keys to this dough, which is really kind of lightly chewy on the inside and has a slight bit of a crunch. And it's just luscious. There are a couple of keys here. Another key is that you use hot water. And there was an article in the New York Times, like I said, about 3 days ago, that explained what hot water dough is and what hot water does. And actually the water that you add here, you're supposed to add water that has boiled. And it helps the starch in the flour gelatinize, which is what gives it that nice crispy bit. No, excuse me, that's what gives it the squishiness in the middle. And then we're going to add a little bit of colder water later, and that helps it crisp up. So it's all kind of this alchemy that literally is just coming from the temperature of the water. So I'm going to just start this on low, and then I'm going to go get the water and add it in. So the only thing you have to kind of pay attention to here then is that you can't get your yeast too hot because the boiling water will kill the yeast. Lorenzo, mi fai 7 minuti per favore?
7 da ora?
Da ora, grazie. So the yeast, of course, needs to be dissolved with sugar and tepid water, which I did ahead of time, and here it is. So you can't add the boiling hot water to the yeast or you'll kill your yeast. So you kind of have to do this in steps to make sure that you get the benefit of the hot water without killing the yeast. At this point, the hot water has spread out enough in the flour so the temperature is lowered. I'm going to go ahead and add my yeast. So I'm going to let that go on low. Halfway through, I'm going to add some salt in the rest of the water, which then is going to be a cooler temperature. And at the very end, I'm going to add some olive oil. In the meantime, I'm going to make the cicatelli. So this pasta is, when I I just kind of, I felt like I made a discovery. I was talking to a friend of Lorenzo's as well. Her name is Gianna. She's married to a friend of ours, and she's an interesting person. Her name is Gianna Fratta, and she is, she directs, she's an orchestra director. And she's one of the few female orchestra directors on the planet, I think. There aren't very many of them. So she's an orchestra director, and she's from Foggia. And she was talking to me. We were talking about, first of all, we were talking about fennel. This is fennel fronds. And she said, "Ooh, they're so good on cicatelli." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Cicatelli." And I said, "No, I've never heard of that before." But it turns out it's the answer to a question. Because my grandmother, who is from the area of Foggia, there near remember the cathedral at Troia? So my grandmother's from that area. And in that area, they make a pasta called cicatelli, and they put that on it. Well, my grandmother made a pasta called cicadelles, and for years I've been thinking, what are cicadelles? Where does this possibly come from? There's no pasta called cicadelles. I couldn't figure it out. So Gianna goes, "Oh yeah, we eat fennel on cicatelli, and they're called cicatelle. They're also called cicatelle." But in any event, most of those Southern dialects, Southern accents, any double L can turn into a D. So cicatelle can turn into a cicatelle. And if you live in Pennsylvania, it probably is the cicadelle. So I'm pretty sure that that's how this whole thing worked out. So I'm kind of excited because literally for 20 years, I've been trying to figure out where the heck did the cicadelle come from. And I think I just figured it out. So what it is this kind of a pasta, which is in some places called a cavatello. And I've used the same mix of flours that we use there. There's some hard wheat flour, which is called rimacinata, very finely ground hard wheat flour, and all-purpose flour. And this has no eggs in it. This dough only has, I'm gonna put in some salt, and then it has water and a spoonful of olive oil, oddly enough. You don't usually put oil in pasta, but this one gets it. So I'm going to use, it's about 3/4 of a cup of water with 1 tablespoon of olive oil. And so y'all have seen me do this before. I've made the well, and now I'm going to just mix. I'm just going to make a dough by mixing in the flour with the water and oil. This is super runny. It makes a really nice kind of light pasta without the eggs in it. And it's also kind of got a nice little kind of chew to it. And it's kind of fun to make, and you don't need a pasta machine. You don't even have to roll it out. You don't even need a rolling pin. And so I remember doing this literally with my grandmother when I was a kid. So it's kind of a good recipe for kids. My bread, I'm using the dough hook of my KitchenAid over there. Looks like it's trying to eject the dough. Lorenzo, quanti minuti mancano là?
Siamo a 5 minuti ora. Però controllalo perché ti sta smontando.
Sì. Okay, I'm gonna go adjust the dough over here. Quindi 2 minuti. Giusto?
Sì, 1 minuto e mezzo.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add, I think it needs the water now. I'm going to go ahead and add the extra dose of cooler water and salt. Ok, da qua allora 9 minuti, credo, Lorenzo?
9?
Sì, 9-10.
Ok.
right, so again, this is the pasta. It's just flour and water. The dough comes together pretty easily. Gets kneaded until it's smooth. You kind of want to knead it as if it were bread, just to get it to come together and make a nice round ball. So it went from shaggy to smooth in about 30 seconds. You can kind of see how it kind of bounces back up. I'm going to let this rest. So this gets wrapped in saran wrap, and you let it rest for about half an hour. But I have already made one. So I'm going to show you how to form the, it kind of absorbs water as it sits here, and it gets a lot softer. I'm going to show you how to form the cicatelli. So instead of rolling out a sheet of dough like we usually do, these actually get rolled out. They get formed from kind of a long rope. And the thinner, the better. So if you let it, by letting it rest, it doesn't snap back quite so much. So see how thin, I'm literally like your little finger, or even like, you know, a pencil basically. And then I like to cut it on kind of on a diagonal. About an inch long, pieces about an inch long. And you kind of use 3 fingers, and you kind of push down and pull it towards you like this. And you kind of flick it away to make space to make the next one. And my mother made fun of me already because she goes, my mom said, "Are you going to do the flick?" I'm doing the flick. I'll show you what they look like in a second. You're just going to push down and pull it towards you. And it makes basically what you've probably seen as a cavatelli. So there's an opening in there. This one's kind of hard to see. See how they're open? Ecco, it's cavatelli, cicatelli. So once you make them, they need to sit and kind of not harden, but just kind of solidify a little bit. So they get sprinkled with flour and left to rest. And then when you cook them, they literally boil in about sort of 3 minutes. And they'll stick. So keep them kind of far apart. You don't want them on top of each other because they will definitely stick. I'm just gonna make a couple more while we're waiting for the focaccia. So those are cicadades or cicatelli or cavatelli. And then if you want to make orecchiette, you actually need a stiffer dough, but I can kind of try to make one. With that, if you do orecchiette, you start with a thicker piece of dough, sort of like that, like a rope that's about that big. And then you can either do it with your thumb. That's a little bit exaggerated. You can either use your thumb and just kind of push it through there and kind of, let's see. And then they flip them over, they flip them. So you I have the same cavity done with my thumb, and then you kind of flip it over like that and let it dry. Or those ladies, and I've never mastered this, but the ladies on the street, they use a knife and they cut off a bit and they use the back edge of their knife and they kind of roll it and then they flip it. So that's how you make the orecchiette. Personally, I prefer the cicatelli. And I think they'll probably keep for a few days once you let them dry out. If you have a kind of a dry place to keep them, you can make a bunch. And it's kind of almost like meditative when you're sitting there doing the little, making the motion in order to form them. And you can make a lot very quickly. All right, Lorenzo, dove siamo qua?
Siamo a 6 minuti.
Okay, I'm gonna speed this up. I'm gonna scrape down the sides too, because this dough hook tends to kind of go in one direction. There. Get the oil ready. It's acting like it doesn't want to mix in, but it is mixing. So the dough is going to rise for 2 hours on an oiled sheet. Oopsie. Two tablespoons go into the dough. And then I want to put a bunch of oil on here so that it will rise without sticking. It's a super sticky dough.
L'ultimo minuto.
Okay, grazie. I'm gonna add a touch of flour. This dough is supposed to be sticky, but there's a limit to sticky. It's too sticky. There. There it goes. Ci siamo?
Quasi.
Okay. It looks good though. I'm taking it out. Done. Okay, so I'm not going to touch that until you really want to use good oiled hands for this, so that it'll just stick everywhere. So that dough is still warm. It's been in there for 15 minutes. It's still warm. So I'm gonna, this is a dough that raises one time only. You let it rise and then you shape it immediately. So I'm gonna coat it with oil and then I'm gonna break it into 2 pieces because we're gonna make it into basically rounds. And then I'm gonna shape it. You just kind of turn the edges under a couple times until it looks smooth on top. And then pat it out. And you can let it sit just in a warm place for 2 hours and then it gets formed. And you put the toppings on. So I'm gonna let this rest.
Elaine, Susan asks, can you use parchment paper that you oil on the bottom of the pan?
I don't know about that because the parchment paper gets humid.
Yeah.
And I think that would change the way the dough works. So here's an already risen round. You can see how big and fluffy it gets. It really rises a lot. I'm gonna get some more oil on my hands. I'm gonna actually cook it in this pan. Or you can put it in a kind of a round pizza pan if you want. And I noticed the bakers actually use nonstick pans, although I haven't really had trouble with it sticking. I'm just gonna make sure it's oiled top and bottom. Spread it out, it needs to be thin. Kind of thin, but not too thin. And again, it looks like a pizza, but it's really not a pizza. Because it's just got this interesting sort of chewy, crunchy. All right, so there's that, our dough, hot water potato dough. All right, so the toppings are tomatoes, olives, and oregano. And y'all saw those tomatoes that have been hanging there for months. Since I don't have those, I got these. These are hothouse tomatoes from Pacchino in Sicily. And I put some in the oven at a low temperature for sort of an hour and a half, 2 hours, and they got all wrinkly. So what happened is, I think the sort of, they lost a little bit of their wateriness. And these things tend to like squirt everywhere. So the rule in Bari is that you have to break the tomatoes open with your fingers. But if you do that, I get the wall messy. I've already tried that. So I'm going to use the little knife and just kind of get them started. So what happens is you open them up over the dough and all of this liquid comes out. So the dough is going to be covered in tomato juice, basically, and tomato bits. Putting them in the oven at a low temperature, they're kind of like, they're super sweet. It may just be these tomatoes because Pacchino usually has good tomatoes, but we're out of season. So I didn't want to just use fresh out of season tomatoes. Didn't make any sense. All right, so here. Is topping. You can leave some white space. It doesn't have to be totally covered. I'll do one more. That, a tiny bit of salt, some oregano. This is so aromatic.
It's not fresh oregano.
No, this is definitely dried oregano. And then a couple of olives, and they literally use like 4. And these are green olives, pits in. Beware to anybody who's eating this. The pit is in here. And then more oil. And it really needs to be kind of doused. I'm going to make a little border here so I don't lose it. So I'm going to put some more in the pan too.
And also capers or not?
Nope. No capers, just this. I'm going to do one more tomato because I think I need some more juice over here. Just doing this for the juice. Okay, then this goes in the oven. And it goes into the oven as hot as your oven will go. My oven goes to 260. Lorenzo, let's try, allora, 20 minuti era bruciacchiato, quindi proviamo 15, va bene?
Okay.
So you want it to go into your oven as hot as your oven goes, which is probably 250. Mine's 260. The baker lady says 270 is good. We'll see. All right, I'm going to shift to the stove area. So you can see I've already made some cicatelle. They've been sitting here. They're they just kind of hold their shape if you let them just kind of rest for a bit. So these have been resting for a couple of hours. And the sauce is, if I can get this on, which I cannot. So the sauce is, like I said, the fennel fronds. And these are growing right now. And they're all over the countryside, basically. If you go for a walk anywhere from, Tuscany south, you run into fennel plants. And so the way that we've prepared them is you take off the, first of all, the cicatelli you can make with any sauce. You don't have to use this. You take off the first sort of 3 layers, 2 or 3 layers, and you just save the kind of lighter green stalks and the fronds. And then from here, this is what was in the middle. You can actually eat almost all of that. So whatever's tender, then you just boil. And then I've done sort of that Southern Italian thing where you use the water that you boiled the vegetables in to boil the pasta. So I've saved my water, which is kind of this weird orange color now from the fennel. And I use salt in the water. I just learned recently, this is the boiled fennel. I just learned recently that if you put salt in the water with your vegetables, the vegetables won't lose their own salt. I think they titrate, I think is the word. So if you put vegetables in water, just even the liquid that's inside the vegetables, the saltiness is gonna try to even out. So it will expel its own salt. Whereas if you put the vegetable into salted water, there's no need to titrate, and the natural salt of the vegetables stay in the vegetables. I thought that was an interesting point. I had never considered that. So the pasta sauce is boiled fennel, wild fennel fronds. I have some onion that I've already just kind of let the onion go golden. And to this, a lot of olive oil and some onion, I'm going to add 3 anchovies. And again, we've talked about this here before, but anchovies, this is a nice, good kind of fresh anchovy. Can you see how that lovely, almost pink color and kind of silver on the back? And it's really got some good texture to it. It's not squishy at all. I mean, it feels just like, it's just very dense. This is a very good anchovy. Anchovies have a shelf life. And if you get an older anchovy, sometimes they're dark brown and really squishy and they taste disgusting. So I have a feeling that a lot of times when people say they don't like anchovies, maybe they've never had a fresh anchovy before. And this is a salted anchovy. It's not a fresh fish, but it's within its shelf life. And it's really good. And literally it kind of tastes like the ocean. And they do this thing where they just melt. And so I've added them to the oil and onions, and there's some heat on there. And the anchovies will just kind of turn almost into, they'll just kind of disappear and leave some sort of umami. That's their purpose here. I'm going to add a little tiny bit of hot pepper just to give it a little bit of interest. And this pepper's super hot, so I'm not adding very much. And then I'm just going to chop this up pretty finely. The fennel just has this anise smell. It's really pretty, very fresh. And so the water actually smells like that as it's boiling. It's like a tisane. This is also a good ingredient in other kind of vegetable mixes, or even I have a friend who puts it together with, for example, the artichokes and fava. We did that in here a week or 2 ago. Or I've even had this, for example, little bits of fennel frond in meatballs, or even like in a fish cake. It kind of almost works like dill. It's not dill, but it kind of works in the same way. So I'm going to put that in with the onions. So the anchovies have all but disappeared. Just the few minutes on with a little bit of heat, they've just kind of disappeared. And I'm not going to add any salt because the anchovies are super salty, but I am going to add a little bit more olive oil. Again, I'm using this Pugliese oil from Intini, which is so good. It's called Cima di Mola, and I think this is pretty much the spiciest olive oil I have ever tasted. And I think it is the spiciest olive oil out there. I think this has one of the highest polyphenol contents of any oil in Italy anyway. That of course mellows out when you cook with it, but it's got good kind of grassy, spicy, full-bodied aromas that are going to be great with all this pasta. Okay. I'm going to throw in the pastas, as they say. So this is already salted water. Again, this is where the fennel was boiled, so it's kind of a funny orange color. That's going to give a little bit of flavor and vitamins back to the pasta. And this is fresh pasta, so it really cooks quickly. When it floats, it's pretty much done. This is a little bit, since there's no egg in here though, I'm gonna kind of make sure that it's really cooked, because you just want to make sure the flour's cooked through. If y'all have any questions at this point, we're just waiting for the pasta and we're waiting for the focaccia. If y'all want to even maybe open your microphone, if you can kind of individually open your microphone and make a comment or ask a question. Lorenzo, are there any questions?
No. I got distracted because I found that Steve and I are relatives.
Who?
Yeah, Steve with Steve Cavallo, because his grandfather, the name is Girolamo.
No.
And they say him that Girolamo is a patronymic. So why not? We should be cousins.
Exactly. I think you are.
No, we have no question. Someone asked if you can send in the email the picture of the labels of Sagona oil, because I cannot find the right olive oil.
Yes, I will do that. I'll send the pictures and I'll let you know where you can get it.
I find it in Facebook or in internet, but I cannot send in the chat the images. So.
Oh, right. I'll send them tomorrow.
Elaine, I think you did an excellent job with the cicatellis.
Thank you. I'm about to put them in the sauce. Here they go.
David asked, can you repeat about the salt and the vegetables?
Yes. So the vegetables, if you put them into non-salted water, the salt in the vegetables, basically the water in the vegetables and the water in the pot want to have the same salinity. Therefore, the vegetables will expel their salt into the water. However, if you put salt in the water, I want to add some water to my pan here. If you put salt in the water, then the vegetables have no need to expel their salt because the salinity is already relatively the same in the pot as it is on the interior of the vegetables. Does that make sense? It makes sense to me.
Is there a particular kind of potato that you use in the focaccia dough?
I use a kind of not a floury white potato, but a yellow potato or any potato that doesn't just crumble. It had some had some body to it. More of a waxy potato. All right, so this is done.
When you say hard wet flour, Michael say you can use semolina flour or not. It's another kind of.
Yes, yes, it's semolina, but you want what they call it rimashinaka. So you want super fine semolina, and I have before in the United States taken the semolina that I found on the shelf and put it in the food processor in order to grind it up a little bit more. It needs to be really, really, really fine. It doesn't need to be big fat like cornmeal. So here's the pasta. Cicatelle with wild fennel fronds.
You use some cheese over there or not?
Say,
no cheese.
Formaggio.
No, does not need formaggio. At
No?
the very least, no. At the very least, I would use some breadcrumbs, but I don't think it even needs that. It's good just the way it is. And this pasta is interesting. It's really got an interesting kind of a bite to it. It's kind of chewy. It's chewy in a good way. It's interesting. Lorenzo, quanti minuti abbiamo qui?
Allora, abbiamo ancora 3 minuti.
I just saw, pasta with no cheese. Not all pasta gets cheese. Only some pasta gets cheese. Not all pasta gets cheese. This doesn't need cheese. There's a little bit of anchovy and hot pepper in there. It just doesn't need cheese. If you wanted to put something on top for the fun of it, you could use some toasted breadcrumbs, which would give it a little bit of
Yeah, but I discovered that Steve and I are addicted with cheese. So
you are related.
Yes.
I think it would be delicious with some burrata crumbled on top.
Burrata doesn't crumble.
Well, now you know what I mean, just pieces torn. Cicatelli.
I think that's overkill.
That's why I like it.
So here is hang on, this is too hot. I have to move this. I can't move that. So here is the focaccia Barese, which is, it just came out of a 260-degree oven. So it's like, I'm going to try to,
Could you show the other one, please?
That's centigrade, huh, Lane?
Centigrade. The other one is a little bruschetto, Lorenzo.
Yeah, because the difference, you can show the difference in few minutes. The first one is in 20 minutes and the other one is in 14 minutes.
So this is, the underneath, it's too hot for me to pick up. The underneath is a very beautiful golden brown. I don't know if y'all can get it.
Yeah, we see. We see.
Very beautiful golden brown. It's a little bit higher than I would like. I would have made it thinner, but I made the previous one really thin, and it stayed in. While I was talking about the art, it stayed in the oven. Quanti minuti, Lorenzo?
Questa o la prima?
La prima.
20.
Okay, so the recipe officially said 25 to 30. This is 20.
Okay.
Too much, too many.
Too much?
I did 20 minutes the other day.
We can put some cheese over that.
So I did 20 minutes the other day and it worked out fine, but it was a little bit thicker. And so I prefer thin. The focaccia in Bari is quite thin and it's very kind of, you pick it up and it kind of sags. It's not crispy at all. This is crispy and also burned, so forget it.
It's burned.
Pretty much burned, crispy and burned. And then this one is perfect. I wish it were a little bit thinner, but again, that one was thinner and it got, carbonized. So I made it hot.
The one in the back, it's just like the picture from Bari.
This one looks this one actually does look just like it's from Bari.
Oh, good. It looks delicious. Thank you.
It does.
Y'all, thanks for tuning in. I will be sending recipes tomorrow. I would love to pass the plate. Come visit. Why don't y'all just all come over and we'll go to Bari and just eat it from the panificio Florida. It'll be much easier.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Y'all so much. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great program. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Thank y'all.
Ciao, Bella.
Ciao, Margarita.
Fabulous morning. Thank you.
Wait, who's Lisa McClung?
Yes.
Your grandparents are from Bari? Hang on a second. I'm reading the chat.
Yeah, she asked when we can.
Come visit. We'll go to Bari and see your grandparents' house. That sound fun?
Okay, ciao Lorenzo.
Ciao, Di.
Hey. Thanks, Elaine.
Ciao.
Bye, y'all. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
All right, see y'all. Hope to see y'all next time.
Bye.